What's up everyone, welcome back to more Reddit stories about Karens, crazy people, and all that kind of stuff. So as usual, consider hitting that subscribe button for more Reddit content if you're new here, and let's get into today's stories. Son intentionally ruined an entire freezer of meat, so I made him deal with it. I go hunting every year. I'm not a trophy hunter by any means. I do it for meat and mostly purely for economic reasons at this point. Taking a few deer off my property once a year keeps my freezer stocked and the grocery bill way down, which is important because finances can be tight sometimes. As a little relevant background, the bulk of the meat is kept in a large freezer in the garage, and about once a week we pull out what we will need for the next week or so, which means the freezer is normally only opened about once a week. My son, 15, has decided that he is vegetarian about 6 months ago, which my wife and I have no problems with. We started making meatless meals twice a week, and made sure every other dinner was such that the meat was separate from everything else, so he could still eat with us. This has been working great for the last 6 months with no complaints. However, last week when I pulled the meat for the week out of our freezer in the garage, he decided to come behind me and unplug the freezer. I guess he thought we weren't doing enough to support his cause. He never spoke to us or complained about our twice-a-week setup prior to unplugging the freezer. Well, as you can imagine, with the now unrefrigerated pile of meat in the summer heat, it didn't take long for the meat to start to rot and stink. The freezer kept the smell in for a while, so by the time we finally noticed, everything was completely putrid. I asked my son if he knew what happened, and he proudly said that he had unplugged it on purpose, and now we would have to be meat-free. I told him that he didn't have the right to ruin a freezer full of meat and raise the family's grocery bill without discussing it with anyone. I told him that as part of his punishment, he had to clean up his mess, meaning dispose of all the rotting meat and either sufficiently clean and sanitize the freezer or purchase a new one out of his savings. He's mad at me for making him interact with meat in any form, but he made the mess, he needs to clean it up. So it's obvious that the son did this in protest of meat consumption, but it's also clear that he really didn't actually think through the implications of doing this. Because this probably isn't going to stop the family from eating meat in general. It's not like they're just going to say, oh, you ruined all the meat? Well, guess we're vegetarians now. So what he really did was made all this meat go to waste, and now the deer died for nothing. And on top of that, the family is now going to have to buy more meat, and therefore further supporting the meat industry. So this whole thing probably had the opposite effect of what the kid was going for. Entitled neighbor thinks it's my fault he backed into my parked car. I wasn't anywhere near it at the time. This took place several years ago. I work in a group home for adults with special needs. The building I work in is just a regular bungalow in a residential area. Parking isn't ideal because all we have is one narrow driveway. So if the driveway is free when you get there, fine. But if someone is already parked there when you arrive, you end up blocking them in if you park in the driveway. This is not ideal as we often leave on errands for residents during our shift. So when the driveway is occupied, we park on the street in front of the house. This is perfectly legal. I live in Canada in an area that gets a ton of snow in the winter. So the only rules about parking are you can't block a fire hydrant. And from the 15th of October to the 15th of April, you can't park on the street from midnight to 7 a.m. This is to allow snowplows to do their job in the event of a storm. All other times of day are fair game, and anything in the summer is acceptable. My story took place on a sunny afternoon in late June, so it was perfectly legal for me to park on the street. So I'm at work doing my job when there's a knock on the door. My coworker answered. Turned out it was the guy who lives across the street. He and his wife were heading out of town and were traveling in their truck, which had a trailer hitched to the back. My car was parked on the street across from him, and as he was backing out of his driveway, he backed his trailer right into my front driver's side wheel well. So I go out to inspect the damage and he's already mad, saying how frustrating it is that the people in our house are always parked on the street, makes it hard for him to get out of his driveway, etc. Mind you, this is the first time he said anything to any of us, but whatever. I didn't say anything to him, just looked at my car and saw the damage is pretty bad. Ended up costing $2,000 to repair. So I just say, let's exchange insurance information. Literally the only thing I've said to him at this point. He then gets very angry, starts yelling, and says he refuses to go through insurance. It's my fault for being parked on the street, and he'll pay for the damages, but only if I take my car to this guy he knows. His wife then adds that they were doing me a favor by even telling me. They could have just driven off. Well, technically yes, but that's actually illegal. So no, you weren't doing me any favors. Again, I don't say much. I just reiterate that I'd like to go through insurance. He flat out refuses, which is also illegal. So I say, fine, I'm just going to call the police. At this point, he says he's not sticking around and he and his wife drive off. I called the cops. The cops arrive, see that I'm parked legally, and say there's no reason he shouldn't have been able to back out without hitting me. Now here's perhaps the most annoying part. They track him down the next day and come back to let me know they've spoken with him. Turns out he's a retired guard for the local jail, and according to the officer who did the follow-up, he, quote, seems like a good guy, quite nice. Well, yes, I'm sure he was nice to the cop. Me, the rather small female civilian, not so much. The cop tries to convince me to not go through insurance. Like, what? He's part of your club, so he gets a free pass to be a dick? No thanks. Dude verbally assaulted me for his mistake, then drove away from the scene of an accident. Fine him. Don't try to make this easier on him. He's a dick. I went through insurance. My insurance covered 100% of the cost and deemed it not my fault, which was a relief as it means my premiums were not affected. I'm pretty sure cops have to issue a ticket when a motor vehicle collision occurs. So not sure what happened with the neighbor, but I'm guessing he received some sort of fine, because I know I didn't. New neighbor's kids started kicking my dogs unprovoked. This backfired on them. To preface this, there's a rental house across the street from my home that recently had some terrible neighbors who got evicted that I had previously posted about on Reddit. Well, lightning struck twice. Even worse neighbors moved in. Less than a month ago, a new family moved into the house across the street from mine. This house had previously been occupied by 3 families who had a crew of kids and a basketball hoop that resulted in over $7,000 worth of damage to my vehicles, and a case pending in small claims court from the kids jumping on them and climbing on them. They were not evicted until I filed a lawsuit against their landlord for non-compliance with a no contact and no trespassing order. The new family seemed nice enough. It was a husband and wife and 2 boys, aged 6 and 12. It was refreshing to not have the ragtag crew living across the street from us for the first time in about 4 years. Every morning, the kids walked to the bus stop and the mom and the guy would go to work. Nothing at all seemed out of the ordinary whatsoever. About a week ago, the 12-year-old was out in his driveway with his little scooter doing tricks, and I was taking my dogs, 2 border collies, out of the house to go for a walk, when the 12-year-old ran over to my driveway. Initially, I thought that he was only wanting to pet the dogs, but instead he started kicking them extremely hard in the side. My older of the 2 dogs started yelping, and at that point I yelled at him to stop and pulled the dogs back into the house. I ran across the street and started knocking on the door to the house, and all I could see is the 12-year-old making faces and flipping me off through the front bay windows. My wife, who was home at the time, noticed the older dog limping and not putting weight down on his back leg, and some red marks on their side through the fur, so she rushed them to the emergency vet for evaluation. I closed the door and locked the house up and called the cops. Both of the family vehicles were in the driveway, making me think that everyone was home, but they knew their kid screwed up and they were avoiding me. I reviewed our security camera footage that showed the boy running over and start kicking the dogs unprovoked. Being a smaller town, the police arrived very quickly, and they took my statement and I showed them the footage. They asked if I had any prior interactions with the child, and I said no. The police officer was rather nervous and asked if the boy was special needs or anything like that, which I was unaware of. He called a family law unit in before he went to talk to the family across the street. When the other unit arrived, it wasn't more than a minute later that I heard a call on the radio for an ambulance. Come to find out, both parents were in the bedroom coming down off of heroin and letting the kids run wild. The parents were taken away in an ambulance for evaluation, and the children were removed from the house by child services. My older dog suffered from blunt force trauma to the leg, and my younger dog had a giant bruise on the side. Luckily, they weren't injured any worse by the boy kicking them. So today, I am coming home from work and I see the parents for the first time in a week since this happened. The man comes over and I'm expecting him to apologize when he says, "What you did was f***ed up, man. My kid didn't hurt your dog, and if I ever see you walking those things, I'll make sure they're actually hurt next time. You'll be hearing from our lawyer." I didn't say a word to the man, but my dog, who can barely walk now, begs to differ on his opinion that his son didn't hurt him. Thankfully, we have pet insurance and only had to pay the deductible of the $1,400 vet bill. I notified the officer who took my statement and had been working the case of what happened, and there's a police vehicle over at the house right now. I don't even know how to proceed in this situation. Update. The man was arrested again for criminal threats, and there's a civil protection order in place. The officer said there's a very low possibility he will be coming back to this address after the way booking went. Update 2. I got a call from the police department early this morning. The woman who lives there was arrested last night at the police station after they took the husband in. They're getting arraigned today on child neglect and drug charges, but are pending for their criminal threats and assault on an officer charges. They're going to get a subpoena for me to appear in court on that case if it is filed. I asked about the kids, but the officer said they can't tell me anything about the case. Coworker unknowingly ate dog food for close to 6 months. Earlier last year, I bought a puppy, some kind of walking mop, cute as heck. The seller warned me it had very specific dietary requirements. Honestly, the last thing I wanted to do on my time off was to make dog food, so I approached a woman recommended by my local pet shop to make 2 weeks worth of food. She uses very cheap cuts, grains, and supplements specifically formulated for dogs. I pick up the individually packaged bags every second Monday morning and keep them in a plastic container labeled with my name in the community fridge, then take it home after work. It doesn't take up much room. A while ago, I noticed that some of the bags began going missing, then found the empties in the waste bin. They are marked DF with the date in black Sharpie. I immediately knew what was going on and thought it was funny. Luckily, my mother is in love with Doggo Mopface, and when she dog sits, around 3 times a week, she feeds her, so Puppers never goes hungry. So I let it go on, occasionally complaining to HR and colleagues about my specialty food being stolen. Other than a sternly worded email, nothing was ever done. Finally, during our 6-month productivity meeting, I loudly complained that my bags of dog food were still going missing on the regular, because now I actually was getting pissed at the blatant theft. 2 young guys gave me horrified looks. Neither of them ever fessed up to the pilfering, but since that meeting, my dog food has never gone missing. My close office colleague thought it was funny, but said I was a real asshole for allowing it to go on for so long. At least I know it must taste alright, and maybe I'm imagining it, but their hair does seem shinier. Anyway friends, that's gonna do it for today. Thank you for watching, I appreciate it. If you enjoyed, be sure to drop a like, and if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more Reddit content like this. Anyway, take care, and I'll see you next time.